Okay, I think we're ready to get started. Let's call the case of United States v. Kara Bassett. My name is Judge Lighty. Two things before we start. First and foremost, as I told the competitors in the last round, I just started Invisalign a couple days ago, so it's a little difficult to talk. So if there's anything that I say that the two of you can't understand, I will not get offended. Please, please, please ask me to, and I'll try and say it a little bit clearer. The second thing is, because of the virtual nature of this trial, when either of you make objection arguments and you're wanting to respond to opposing counsel's objection arguments, just please take a moment to pause before asking me for permission to respond. I'm going to give you an opportunity to respond, but then otherwise we avoid the issue of cutting each other off. Good on that?
Great, thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Scoring judges, please look to the two bottoms on the lower left corner of your screen. Turn off your audio and your video, like Mr. DeCamp just asked. This should remain off the entire trial. You should also have your video set to hide all non-video participants. And this means that the only people on the screen right now should be Ms. Desai, Mr. Marx, and myself. All right. Can the attorneys please make their appearances?
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, or at least it's afternoon where I am. My name's Ethan Marks, and along with my second chair, Mr. Michael Ragnoni, will be representing the people of the United States in this case. You won't be able to see or hear Mr. Ragnoni today, as he's dealing with all that technological, all that part of the trial.
Wonderful. Good afternoon, Mr. Marks. Defense counsel.
Good afternoon, Your Honor, members of the jury. My name is Shaylee Desai, and today I represent the defendant, Ms. Kara Bassett, and I'm also joined by my second chair, Attorney Maya Dabrowski.
Wonderful. Good afternoon, Ms. Desai.
Good afternoon.
Well, we have a few preliminary matters we'd like to address, if that's all right with the court.
That's absolutely fine. Go right ahead.
First of all, due to the virtual nature of today's trial, we just want to ask that if at any point you can't see or hear us, just to feel free to interrupt so we can try to fix that issue.
Of course.
And then second, we just want to draw the court's attention to two pretrial matters that were addressed in the pretrial orders by Judge Falkenstein. Okay. That's Order 7 and 6. We're going to go backwards if you'll indulge us for a second. Order 7 says that Exhibits 4 through 33 have been admitted into evidence and can be used at any point during today's trial. And then hand in hand with that, Order 6 states that all exhibits that are in evidence can be displayed on screen at any time without having to ask the court's permission.
That's fine with me.
And finally, Your Honor, we just like to invoke Rule 615, calling for the constructive sequestration of all witnesses.
That's granted.
And that's all from the government, Your Honor.
Wonderful. Ms. Desai?
Yes, the defense has a few preliminary matters as well. We'd like to draw the court's attention to Evidentiary Ruling 11. It states that although Agent Branham is familiar with Exhibits 35 through 44, he's not allowed to testify to them or authenticate them, Your Honor.
Is that your understanding as well, Mr. Marks?
Yes, Your Honor. We won't be asking the agent about those documents.
And that's fine with me.
And Your Honor, we'd also like to note that we'd also like to ask if all witnesses, barring our party's representative, be constructively sequestered instead of all witnesses.
Is that fine with you as well, Mr. Marks?
We just like to ask which party representative counsel is having testify today.
They won't be testifying, but Ms. Kara Bassett, our party representative, we ask that she's constructively sequestered.
Okay, I understand. That's fine.
That's our understanding as well.
Perfect. Any other pretrial issues that we need to attend to right now?
No, Your Honor. The defense is ready to proceed.
All right. We'll move on to opening statements from each party. At this time, again, we ask that everyone change their setting to speaker view. Oh, perfect. Mr. DeCamp, he's got it. Okay, so listen to what Mr. DeCamp says. So speaker view at this time. And with that, Mr. Marks, when you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor.
You're ready for the court.
Judge Lighty, Ms. Desai, members of the jury. This is Don Clark. Don lived an adventurous life. He was a husband, a father to 2 children, an avid pilot, and the owner of an elephant park. But you'll learn today that Don wasn't the only owner of that park. He managed it alongside his wife, Miss Kara Bassett. But you'll learn that Kara and Don didn't always see eye to eye on how that park should be run. In fact, you're going to learn that Miss Bassett would get angry. So angry that she would threaten her husband to the point that he was afraid for his own life. But Don didn't change how that park was run. So on August 18th, 2017, you'll hear that Miss Bassett's words, threats, and anger transformed into violence. You'll hear that she stabbed her husband with a deadly poison called carfentanil, loaded his lifeless body into the back of her car, and drove it 100 miles away, where she dumped it into a swamp. That's why we as the government have charged the defendant with murder. And when we brought that charge, we took on a burden. Today, it's our duty to prove to you, beyond a reasonable doubt, that Miss Bassett killed her husband, and that she did so intentionally. And Your Honors, members of the jury, that's exactly what we're going to prove today. We're going to prove it by asking you to follow what was forgotten. Well, you're going to hear about the evidence, the things that Miss Bassett did to kill her husband. We're actually going to ask you to focus on the three things she forgot to do. Three pieces of evidence she forgot to cover up. Follow what was forgotten from the carfentanil to the car, from the car to the call, and from that call straight on back to the defendant. So first, we'll follow that carfentanil. You'll learn today that the elephant park kept elephant tranquilizers composed of a substance called carfentanil. You're going to hear that due to the dangerous nature of that chemical, the government actually required the park to keep a logbook of how much they have remaining. But while you'll learn that on August 18th, 2017, that log showed that there should have been 24 tranquilizers at the park, the FBI only found 23. So we'll follow that carfentanil back to the defendant. You'll learn that on August 18th, Miss Bassett snuck into that supply room, stole that carfentanil, snuck up on her husband, and stabbed him. But she forgot to cover up that carfentanil. She forgot to cover up that log. She forgot to cover up her guilt. But that's not the only thing the defendant forgot to do, ladies and gentlemen. Today you're going to hear from the FBI agent who investigated this case, a man by the name of Steph Branham. Agent Branham is going to tell you that the FBI actually found GPS records tracking Miss Bassett's car going to a swamp 100 miles away, the Big Gum Swamp. In fact, you're also going to hear that the FBI found algae on Miss Bassett's own boots and on the gas pedal of that car that was identical to algae recovered from that same swamp. So finally, we're going to ask you to follow what was forgotten back to the call. You'll learn today that in the week after Miss Bassett claims her husband disappeared, she didn't call him once. She forgot to make herself look innocent because she wasn't. Follow what was forgotten. You'll find the defendant. And when you do, we'll ask that you find her guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marx. Ms. Desai, opening statement for the defense?
Yes, Your Honor.
Proceed when you're ready.
His face went white, then he went dark. May it please the court, opposing counsel, members of the jury. Attorney Marx just told you a compelling story, but not the complete story. What if I told you we don't know if Don Clark is dead? What if I told you there is no clear evidence linking Kara Bassett to her husband's disappearance? What if I told you there are other suspects without alibis for the night in question? Would that give you pause? Would that cause you to doubt what Attorney Marx just told you? You see, it's August 18th, 2017. An unknown number from Costa Rica texts Don Clark twice. They then called Don Clark and talked to him for 52 minutes. Don is nervous. He's worried. He's scared. His face turns white. Then he goes dark. He disappears, and no one has seen him since. Ladies and gentlemen, who was that caller? What did they tell Don Clark, and why did he disappear just a few hours later? You see, it's questions like those the government has to answer today to meet their burden. And their answers have to convince you beyond a reasonable doubt that Kara Bassett killed Don Clark. But we're going to show you 3 reasons why the government won't meet their burden today. Missing links, missing alibis, and a missing caller. First, missing links. You're going to hear a lot from the government today about a missing syringe of carfentanil and about the area where they think Don's body is buried, Big Gum Swamp. But I want you to pay attention. They won't present a single piece of evidence that Kara Bassett ever touched that missing syringe or ever went to that swamp. Second, missing alibis. You'll hear that multiple employees had access to the toxin that the government thinks killed Don Clark. And you'll hear that some of these employees don't have alibis for the night in question, that they could have been the ones to take that missing syringe. And third, a missing caller. You're going to learn that Don Clark had business interests with the Costa Rican mafia. And we're going to show you phone records from the night he disappeared. You'll see that an unknown number from Costa Rica texted Don Clark twice and spoke to him for 52 minutes. Eyewitness Joe Young will tell you that that's when she saw Don Clark's face turn white. Ladies and gentlemen, since that phone call, no one has seen Don Clark. We don't know where he is. We don't know if he's alive, and we don't know if he's okay. But we know that on August 18th, 2017, when someone from Costa Rica called Don Clark, Don's face turned white. Then he went dark. That's why at the conclusion of today's trial, I'm going to ask you to find Kara Bassett not guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Desai. Sworn judges, take a moment to score the advocates' performances. And as instructed, please switch over to gallery view at this time. All right, Mr. Marx, go ahead and call your first witness.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the government calls Agent Steph Branham to the stand. Good afternoon, Agent. Can you see and hear me all right?
Yes, sir, I can.
Could you go ahead and introduce yourself to the jury?
Good afternoon. My name is Steph Branham.
What do you do for a living, sir?
I'm a senior special agent for the FBI.
And what training did you receive in order to become a senior special agent?
Well, I graduated from the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia, and ever since then, I've completed annual training.
Were you involved in the investigation into the disappearance of Don Clark?
Yes, sir. I was the lead investigator into Mr. Clark's disappearance.
What was the result of that investigation?
We ultimately charged Don Clark's wife, the defendant Kara Bassett, with murder.
I want to start at the beginning of that investigation. Were you able to search Miss Bassett's elephant park?
Yes, sir. That's the first place we went when we heard the call.
Did you find anything missing from that elephant park, sir?
Yes, sir, we did. After searching all of the buildings at the park, we found that two items specifically were missing. First, we noticed a syringe of elephant tranquilizer was unaccounted for. And in addition to that, we found that a vehicle registered to Mr. Clark was not on the property when we searched it.
I want to break that down for the jury and follow those two missing items, starting with that elephant tranquilizer. Did you learn during the course of your investigation what substance that tranquilizer was composed of?
Yes, sir, that tranquilizer included a substance known as carfentanil.
Would you recognize a photo of that drug as well as a data sheet that goes with it?
Yes, sir, I would.
Mr. Ragnoni, could we get those documents on the screen? Your Honor, those are part of the exhibits that have been pre-admitted.
Understood.
Sir, do you recognize those documents?
Yes, I do. On the left is a picture of one of those syringes of carfentanil, and on the right is a material safety data sheet, which I reviewed as a part of my investigation.
And sir, during your investigation, did you learn about the toxicity of that substance?
Yes, sir, I did. I learned that carfentanil is 5,000 times more toxic than heroin, and I learned that only 1 milligram of this substance can be fatal to a human being.
You said that 1 milligram of that substance can be fatal to a human being. Do you know how many milligrams of carfentanil are in the syringe on the left?
Yes, sir. In a syringe like the one pictured on the left, there would be 10 milligrams of carfentanil.
Let's follow that carfentanil. Did the park keep a record of how many tranquilizers were remaining?
Yes, sir, they did.
But would you recognize that logbook?
I would.
Mr. Ragnoni, could we get that log on the screen, please? Again, Your Honor, that's one of those pre-admitted exhibits. Agent, do you recognize that document?
Yes, sir. This is the logbook that the park kept of the syringes of carfentanil.
And sir, during your investigation, did you learn how many syringes of carfentanil that log showed should have been at the park on the 18th?
Yes, sir. As you can see at the bottom of that log, it states that there should have been 24 syringes remaining.
How many syringes did your team find in their investigation?
We were only able to locate 23 syringes when we performed our investigation.
And I want to ask you, sir, about something, a missing alibi. Did you know that there were other people, other than the defendant, who had access to that carfentanil?
Yes, sir, we were aware of that.
In the course of your investigation, did you find any evidence that those people had any motive to kill Don Clark?
No, sir. We interviewed both of those employees.
Objection, Your Honor. To an improper lay opinion. If I may elaborate, Your Honor.
You may.
Your Honor, opposing counsel asked this witness if they found motive for anyone else to hurt Don Clark. That's outside of this witness's rationally based perception as to if anybody else would want to hurt Don Clark. He would be testifying to their mindset.
Mr. Marx, do you have a response?
Yes, Your Honor. The question as phrased was, did you find any evidence during the course of your investigation that one of those individuals had a motive to kill Don Clark? We're not asking him for an improper opinion about whether they had motive, just whether he was able to recover any evidence that they did, which is within his rationally based perceptions as an FBI agent.
I'm going to go ahead and allow it for now, but Ms. Desai, feel free to re-raise the objection if it seems to teeter on the point of delving into another person's mindset.
Yes, sir.
Then we're.
Agent, did you find any evidence that those other park employees had a motive to kill Don Clark?
No, sir, I did not. I interviewed both of those employees, and we found absolutely no reason that they would want to murder Don Clark.
So, sir, I want to talk now about that second missing item you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, that car. Were you able to track that car, sir?
Yes, sir. We found the vehicle at a local airport, and it was at that point we were able to access the GPS data from the vehicle, which showed us that it had been moving on the night in question.
I want to follow that car. Where did it start out on August 18th, 2017?
Well, on the night of the 18th, the GPS data showed that the van had left the property at 11:17 p.m.
Where did the GPS record show the car going?
After that point, the vehicle traveled 139 miles to the Big Gum Swamp.
And how long was it at the Big Gum Swamp?
It remained at the swamp for about 45 minutes.
And once it left the swamp, where did it go?
The van traveled 132 miles back to the Cary Belle Leon Airport, where it arrived at around 4 in the morning.
During the course of your investigation, did you find any evidence that suggested who was driving the car on that night?
Yes, sir. We were able to collect forensic evidence that connected defendant to that van and to the swamp.
Let's talk about that forensic evidence. What did you find?
Well, specifically, sir, we were able to find algae that was present on the defendant's boots that matched the algae found in the van, as well as the algae found on a wheelchair that was found at the property. And all of those algae samples that we took were a match to the algae at the Big Gum Swamp.
Sir, that's a lot of algae. I want to break that down. Are you familiar with the forensic report that your team prepared today?
Yes, sir, I am.
Let's talk about this analysis. What species of algae were found at the Big Gum Swamp?
Sir, specifically, it was two species of algae, Cladophora and Spirogyra.
And according to your analyst, were those two types of algae commonly found together?
According to the report, no, they are not. Rather, it stated that they are very rare to be found together.
And did that rare combination of algae, was it found anywhere else of the things you tested?
Yes, sir. It was found on the defendant's boots, as well as a wheelchair that we found at the park.
Was it found in that car, sir?
Yes, sir. We found it on the driver's side floor and pedal of the vehicle.
I want to shift gears. I want to talk about a third piece of evidence now. Did you review Miss Bassett's phone logs in today's case?
Yes, sir. As a matter of fact, I did.
Did those phone logs show Miss Bassett calling her husband in the week after he disappeared?
No, sir, they did not.
Did those call logs show any evidence of Miss Bassett texting her husband in the week after he disappeared?
No, sir, it did not.
Agent, when did Miss Bassett report her husband missing to the authorities?
We received a phone call on August 25th, and that is 1 week after she claims her husband went missing.
Agent, I want to talk to you about one last thing. We've talked a lot about the physical evidence in today's case. I want to talk about a potential motive for Miss Bassett. Did you find any evidence suggesting a rationale for why she might wanted to kill her husband?
Yes, sir, we did. We actually learned of a power of attorney document that existed between the defendant and her husband.
Do you recognize that power of attorney document on the screen? Again, Your Honor, that's one of those pre-admitted exhibits.
Yes, sir, this is the power of attorney document that I mentioned.
And what did that power of attorney document allow Miss Clark to do, or Miss Bassett?
Yes, sir, this document granted Mrs. Bassett complete control over the Greater Tallahassee Elephant Park.
And did you talk to Don's attorney about this document at all?
Yes, sir, I did.
Did Don's attorney say that there was anything unusual about that document?
Yes, she did inform me of that. Specifically, this document states...
Hearsay?
Response, Your Honor?
I'm sorry, Ms. Desai, what portion specifically are you objecting to?
Oh, I'm not objecting to the exhibit on the screen, but rather the witness's statement about what Don Clark's attorney told Agent Branham.
Okay, Mr. Marx?
Your Honor, one of those pre-admitted exhibits, Exhibit 4, is a letter from Don Clark's attorney, Mandy Tuminelli, to Agent Branham, so that those statements are already in evidence.
If I may, Your Honor?
Yes.
We still haven't heard the foundation from this witness that, number one, they reviewed Exhibit 4, and number two, that they're testifying solely based off of Exhibit 4 and not out of an out-of-court statement.
Response to that effect, Your Honor?
Yes.
We asked the witness whether he'd spoken to Don Clark's attorney. If the court would like, we can ask him about that specific document. But again, it's already in evidence. That document shows that it was sent to this agent, and the statements we've elicited come directly from that document.
Okay, if you can just go ahead and just make that really clear that just so that it's not a conversation that took
Of course.
separate, and that it's actually being elicited from the document itself. So to
Yes,
that
Your Honor.
effect, I'll sustain the objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
Agent, did you review the letter from Don Clark's attorney?
Yes, the correspondence I was referring to was a letter that I received from Mandy Tuminelli.
Sorry, sir. In that letter, did Mandy Tuminelli talk about anything unusual with this document?
Yes, she did. Specifically, the disappearance clause that is included within this power of attorney.
Thank you, sir. No further questions, Your Honor.
Okay. I just got to notice that time has expired, so there will be no redirect from the government. Which is my understanding, so we'll move on to cross-examination. Ms. Desai?
Yes, Your Honor. Agent Branham, it's possible Don Clark is still alive. Is that right?
I think that is not correct, ma'am.
Agent, you never found his body, did you?
We were never able to locate Don Clark's body. No, ma'am.
You never found any blood of Don Clark's, is that right?
No, we did not find any blood.
And no eyewitnesses saw Don Clark die. Correct, Agent?
No, ma'am. We were not able to find any eyewitnesses for the night in question.
Now, I want to talk about something you mentioned on direct. You talked about a missing syringe of carfentanil. Now, Agent, 4 people had access to that shed of carfentanil at Elephant Park, right?
That's correct. Those people included the defendant, her husband, and 2 other park employees.
And Agent, you're sure about that number, 4 people?
Yes, ma'am. I conducted interviews with every employee at the park, and that was the number that they gave me.
Attorney Dabrowski, please write that down for us. Now, Agent, you actually can't be sure which one of those 4 people took out that missing syringe, right?
Yes, I actually do believe that we know for sure who took that syringe.
So, Agent, you know for sure, even though you have no video footage of anybody taking a syringe out, right?
We do not have any video footage, no.
No eyewitnesses saw somebody take that syringe out, correct?
No, ma'am. We were not able to find any eyewitnesses for that.
And you weren't able to conduct any forensic tests on that missing syringe, were you, Agent?
No, ma'am, we were not.
Now, not only are you unsure of who took that syringe, but you can't tell us when that syringe was taken out. Is that right, Agent?
Not an exact time, no, ma'am.
I want to talk about something else you mentioned on direct. You talked a lot about algae you found on Kara Bassett's boots. Now, Agent, I'm looking for a few numbers here. What is the Redfield ratio of Big Gum Swamp?
Ma'am, I couldn't tell you from memory, but what I do know is that exact ratio of algae existed on Mrs. Bassett's boots, the wheelchair, and the van that we found matching the Big Gum Swamp.
That's all right, Agent. I'm going to help you out a little bit with those numbers. It's 47 to 31 to 29. Now, Agent, can you tell us what the Redfield ratio of Elephant Park is?
No, ma'am. Again, I'm not an expert in algae.
You can't tell us because the FBI never tested algae from the 5 square mile park Kara lived and worked on. Right, Agent?
No, ma'am. We did not take any samples from the park.
Now, Attorney Dabrowski, can you please display Exhibit 25 for us? Your Honor, this has already been admitted into evidence. Now, Agent, the FBI never tested Elephant Park, even though you knew there was a body of water on that park. Is that right?
No, ma'am. We did not test the park.
Now, I want to talk about Don Clark's finances. You're aware that Don Clark had interest with the Costa Rican Mafia?
I am not. I did not become aware of any interest with the mafia, and I found no direct evidence of any such correspondence.
Agent, you and Detective Garmo interviewed Kara Bassett, right?
Yes, we did.
And Kara Bassett informed you that she was in touch with Don Clark was in touch with the Costa Rican Mafia, right?
Not explicitly, no, ma'am. She did state that she thought he might be involved with some shady business dealings, but she didn't know any specifics with regard to that.
And she specifically mentioned mafia-type people, right, Agent?
Yes, ma'am. That was the extent to which she was telling us about that. And when we looked into it, we found no further evidence to suggest whether or not that was true.
Oh, on direct, Attorney Marx asked you a lot about phone records. So I'm going to put those phone records on the screen for us. Attorney Dabrowski, can you please display Exhibit 21? Now, Agent, according to these records, on the night he disappeared, an unknown number from Costa Rica texted Don Clark twice, right?
Yes, ma'am. That's what these phone records reflect.
He texted Don Clark, "Call me immediately." I read that correctly?
Well, ma'am, I'm not sure of the gender of the person who sent those texts, but that is correct. They did say llamame inmediatamente.
And then that same number called Don Clark and spoke to him for 52 minutes. Right, Agent?
That's correct. There was a 52-minute phone call after that point.
Agent, you can't tell us who this caller is, can you?
No, ma'am, I cannot.
You can't tell us what they told Don Clark, can you?
No, ma'am, I cannot.
Can't tell us if they have an alibi for the night in question.
Well, actually, ma'am, I can tell you that at 6 p.m. that night they were in Costa Rica. But other than that, I cannot tell you anymore.
You can't tell us where they were anywhere after that night, can you?
No, ma'am, I'm unaware if they tried to come to Florida from Costa Rica at that point.
And what you can tell us, Agent, is that they were in contact with Don Clark just a few hours before Mr. Clark disappeared, correct?
5 hours to be exact, I would agree.
Now, Agent, I want to talk about what you mentioned earlier about 4 people who had access to the Carfentino shed. And one of those people was Nate Garson, correct?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
Agent, you can't tell us where Nate Garson was on the night of August 18th, 2017, can you?
No, sir, he didn't have an explicit alibi for that time.
Let's talk about another park employee, Saba Grandi. You can't tell us where Saba Grandi was on the night of August 18th, 2017. Is that right, Agent?
No, she was not able to provide us with a confirmable alibi.
And that's because, neither of those 2 people had had an alibi for the night in question. Is that right?
No, ma'am, they were not with any other people who could authenticate their alibi. So no, they did not.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
And obviously no redirect, Your Honor.
Actually, I was going to say, Mr. Marx, that there appears to be a slight time discrepancy that I was informed about, that
All right.
you may have had 20 seconds. I'm going to give you an opportunity and split the baby and give you an extra 10 seconds.
All right, Your Honor.
You are more than welcome to ask it. You don't have to, but the time is yours.
Agent, did you find any evidence that those park employees had a motive?
No, sir. We interviewed all employees and we found that they had absolutely no alibi for murdering Don Clark.
Sorry, a motive, sir, not an alibi.
Oh, no, sir, we did not.
Thank you, sir. Your Honor, no further questions at this time from the government. Your Honor, I believe you're muted. My apologies.
Sorry. Agent Branham, you are free. Thank you so much for your testimony. I'm going to step down. Any other witnesses, Mr. Marks?
No, Your Honor, at this time, the government rests their case in chief.
Wonderful. Okay. Ms. Desai?
Your Honor, the defense calls Joe Young to the stand.
Okay. Ms. Young, you are sworn in. Ms. Desai, proceed when ready.
Yes, Your Honor. Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Hello, my name is Joe Young.
What do you do for a living, Miss Young?
I'm a TV producer. I mostly work on nature documentaries, so I'm sure all of you have seen my work on Animal Planet, Planet Earth, you name it, and I filmed it.
How did you get involved in film producing?
Ever since I was little, I've loved taking cool pictures and videos of nature, and I've always wanted to create a combination between reality TV and nature documentaries, and Kara Bassett gave me that opportunity.
And what exactly was that opportunity, Miss Young?
Back in 2015, Kara called me, told me she was a fan of my work, and said she wanted me to film a documentary called Elephant Queen. It was meant to document the progress and the work they were doing with the Greater Tallahassee Elephant Park.
And what exactly was your role as producer of this film?
I did basically everything. My job was to film, edit. I was filming everyone, including the elephants, the people, the guests, employees. I was especially filming Kara.
And did you ever film Don Clark?
Yeah, Don Clark was part of the film as well. I mostly filmed his interactions with Kara.
And Miss Young, on any given day, how many hours would you be spending at the park with Don and Kara?
I was there for 8 hours almost every day.
And on any given week, about how many days would you be there for?
5 days a week, every week.
How many weeks in total did you spend at the park with Dawn and Kara?
Not too good at math, but I was there for 2 years every week for those 2 years, so about 102 weeks.
Would you say that after 2 years of filming them, you've gotten to know them well?
Yes, I know them very, very well. I was with them all the time.
Now, in a few minutes, I'm going to ask you about your observations of Dawn and Kara. But first, I need to make something clear for the members of the jury. Ms. Young, are you familiar with the shed of carfentanil at Elephant Park?
Yeah, I am.
And were you able to see who went in and out of that shed?
Yes, I know 12 employees at the park had a key to get in.
You just told us 12 people. Ms. Young, are you sure it's not 4 people?
I'm sure it's 12 people.
Objection, lack of foundation, Your Honor, as to how this witness knows that there are 12 individuals with a key.
If I may, Your Honor?
Yes.
We've just laid the foundation that for 5 years, this witness has spent every day at the park 8 hours a day. She also testified that she was able to see who walked in and out of that shed, and she testified that it's a locked shed. We've already laid this foundation as to how she would know.
Response?
Yes.
We just asked that counsel lay foundation as to how she knew that those individuals had keys. Obviously, we know that she knows about the shed, she knows about the carfentanil. We'd ask that that specific foundation be laid.
If I may,
Go ahead, Ms. Desai.
Your Honor, she's already testified that it was a locked shed and that you needed a key to get access into it. She then testified as to how many people she saw enter that locked shed. We've already laid this foundation.
Okay, here's my ruling that it is fine for the witness to say that she saw 12 individuals enter this shed, but to suggest and specifically say that they had access to it, as in like they had their own personal key, I think would be kind of teetering on lack of foundation. So she's fine to say that she saw 12 different people get into a locked shed. Kind of leave it for the jury to think. So I will sustain the objection.
Move to strike the statements, the offending testimony as it pertains to the keys and the access.
I don't really remember what that was, but if it was that they had keys in order to get in, then I'm fine with striking that.
Yes, Your Honor.
May I continue, Your Honor?
Yes.
Ms. Young, how many people would you see enter and leave that shed?
In my time at the park, I've seen 12 people enter and leave the shed.
Attorney Dabrowski, can you please write that down for us? Now, Ms. Young, I want to get back to Dawn and Kara and what you observed about them. You spent 2 years with them. Can you tell us a little bit about the state of their marriage?
Yes, from what I saw and filmed, they were a loving and affectionate couple. I mean, like every married couple, they had their disagreements, but other than that, they were happy.
Objection, speculation as to the statement that Dawn and Kara were happy. But we don't believe that this witness has the personal knowledge to step in their mindset and say that they were happy in that marriage. As we've already heard, she wasn't with them 24/7. She was only there 5 days a week for 8 hours.
If I may, Your Honor.
Of course.
Your Honor, this witness just testified that she spent 2 years with them. She also testified that in the time she was with them and filming them, they were loving and they were affectionate, and she saw them act this way, Your Honor. From what she saw, they were happy.
One last response, Your Honor.
Yes.
We're fine with the witness testifying that she saw them be affectionate with each other or something to that effect that she can observe. But to take it a step further and say that they were happy or happy in their marriage goes beyond her rationally based perceptions and turns into speculation.
I'm going to overrule the objection, but provide the jury with a limiting instruction. This is just based on this witness's interactions that, in her opinion, they seem to be happy.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Ms. Young, you mentioned some disagreements. Did you ever see them fight?
I wouldn't call it a fight, but like I said, I've seen some of their disagreements where they argue with one another.
And did you ever see any physical altercations between them?
No, no physical altercations. Well, there was this
Did you
one
ever
time.
see a time where they got a little bit out of hand?
Yes, one time I saw Kara get angry at Dawn, and she took a tiny little elephant vase, a trinket basically that she threw at him. That was the worst I've ever seen it get. Other than that, they were usually just arguments. And even after them, I would see them make up and return back to their normal state.
Now, I want to talk about Don Clark's finances. Attorney Dabrowski, can you display what's already been entered as Exhibit 33 for us? Ms. Young, this is Don Clark's obituary. According to this document, what was his total net worth?
It says here that it was $8 million. Should have held out for more.
Do you know how Don Clark made this money?
I honestly don't know how he made the money.
Do you know if Don Clark had money that was off the books?
According to this document, it does say he had money off the books.
Attorney Dabrowski, can you please display Exhibit 4 for us? Do you know how Don Clark made this off the books money?
No,
Objection, Your Honor. We'd ask that they lay the foundation that this witness is familiar with this document.
If I may.
Go ahead.
Your Honor, this document has already been entered into evidence. Pursuant to stipulations, we're allowed to use these documents that have already been pre-admitted at any examination, including directs and crosses of witnesses, whether or not they're familiar with it. Furthermore, Your Honor, I'm only asking this witness to testify as to what she can read and not make any conclusions based off of it.
Understood. I do believe that it would be appropriate to ask this witness just if she is in fact familiar with the document, and then to go ahead and read the portion that you're relating to.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Young, do you know what this document is?
Yeah, it looks like a letter from Don Clark's attorney. I think they showed it to me during my interview on TV.
And on this document, does it indicate if Don Clark had off the books money?
Yeah, it says he did have money off the books.
Do you know how he made this off the books money?
I don't. I never asked him, and he never mentioned it.
Do you know if Don Clark had business interests outside of the United States?
Yes, he had a property in Costa Rica.
Did Don ever travel to Costa Rica?
Yeah, he was there all the time.
In the 2 years that you knew him, Miss Young, about how many times would you say he went there?
I believe he went there every couple of months for the 2 years I was there, so about 8 or 9 times.
Do you know what Don Clark would do in Costa Rica?
I don't actually. Every time he'd come back, I was hoping for a little bit more information. I mean, Costa Rica is beautiful. I would love to shoot some films there, but he never talked about anything he did there.
Do you know who Don Clark would meet in Costa Rica?
I don't. He never talked about it.
Or would he ever bring his wife Kara with him on these trips there?
No, that's another thing now that I think about it. I don't think he let her come. I would always hear them talking, and they never went on vacation together, even though that was a vacation home in Costa Rica. For the time that I was there, he went alone.
Miss Young, do you know if Don Clark had contact with anybody from Costa Rica?
Yeah, I do know something about that. The day he went missing, I had a really weird conversation with him, and he was on his phone.
Can you describe what happened in this conversation?
Yeah, it was around 6 p.m. on August 18th, 2017. I was about to leave the park for the evening, and I was talking to Don about some footage I had that day. And all of a sudden, his phone buzzed, so he went to check it, but his face went white. He looked terrified.
Attorney Dabrowski, can you please display Exhibit 21 for us? Ms. Young, to be clear for the jury here, when Don Clark's face went white, what time and date did that occur?
It was 6 p.m. on August 18th, 2017, the night he went missing.
And according to these phone records, what number texted Don Clark at 6 p.m. on August 18th?
It's an unlisted number from San Jose, Costa Rica.
Do you know if Don ever called this number?
Yeah, right after he left, it says, oh, I'm sorry, on the document it says that he called the number around 6 p.m. He was on it for about 52 minutes.
Do you know who Don Clark was talking to that day?
I have absolutely no idea who he was talking to.
Ms. Young, do you know if Don Clark died on August 18, 2017?
I honestly don't know. I do know the FBI never found a body, so I just hope wherever he is, he's okay.
Thank you, Ms. Young. I have nothing further.
Cross-examination, Mr. Marks?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
Yes, sorry.
No problem. Miss Young, can you see and hear me all right?
Yes, I can.
Just let me know if that changes, okay?
All right.
I want to start off by talking about something you talked with Miss Desai about. You don't believe that Don was killed by someone in Costa Rica, do you?
Honestly, I don't know. Like I said, I never heard about who he was interacting with in Costa Rica, so that could be a possibility. Like I said, I don't know what happened. I just hope he's okay.
Ma'am, going back to my question, in your 64 minutes interview, you actually said that you thought he was still alive, right?
Yeah, I do.
And you said a few moments ago that you didn't know exactly what he was doing there, right?
No, I have no idea what he was doing in Costa Rica.
You've never heard him talk about anyone in the mafia to you, right?
No, he tends to keep anything that happens in Costa Rica to himself.
So that's a yes. He didn't tell you about any engagement with anyone from the mafia, did he?
No, like I said, he keeps it to himself.
Didn't tell you that he was afraid of someone living in Costa Rica, right?
No, he didn't.
In your entire 2-year time, when you were recording that documentary, you never learned about any mafia involvements between one of the principal subjects of that documentary, right?
No, I don't believe so.
I want to talk a bit more about that documentary, ma'am. You're aware that you're set to make about over $2.1 million from that documentary, isn't that right?
Yeah, after this whole case blew up, everyone was after me trying to get me to produce with their company. So I'm making bank for sure.
Exactly, ma'am. With all the publicity from today's trial, it's actually boosted the success or the potential success of that documentary, right?
Yes, but like I said, I only get 20%.
But we'll talk about the money in a moment. But you would agree that today's trial, it's boosted your success, right?
Yes, it is a public trial, so people are aware of what's happening.
So let's talk a bit about that money. Part of it's coming from a contract with a streaming service, isn't that right?
Yes.
But over $150,000 is coming to you directly from the defendant, isn't that right?
Well, it's coming because of the agreement that we made when I first started filming. She said she would get 80% of the profit earnings and I would get 20%. So yes, 20% is what I get because that's what me and the defendant agreed on.
Well, all your money isn't coming from that streaming contract, is it, ma'am?
No.
$150,000, more than $150,000 actually, is coming right out of the defendant's pocket, isn't that right?
It's coming from the money we make. That was the split that me and Kara agreed on when we first started filming.
Ma'am, you were paid $5,000 a month by the defendant, isn't that right?
Yes.
That was separate from your streaming service contract, isn't that right?
Yes, that was for all the supplies I needed and for the time that I spent at the park filming everyone.
So you are getting paid by the defendant, right?
Yes.
And ma'am, you'd agree with me that there were some things that the defendant didn't let you film, isn't that right?
Yes, I'm sure. Like everyone, she wanted her privacy with certain things. So whenever she didn't feel comfortable with the camera on, she just told me to turn it off.
Let's talk about some of those instances. Miss Bassett would tell you to turn off the camera whenever she was having a disagreement with her husband, right?
Yes, I don't think people like to air their dirty laundry to the public. So that was one of the circumstances where she didn't want footage.
That's a yes, ma'am?
Yes, she told me to turn it off.
You witnessed multiple disagreements between Dawn and her husband, isn't that right?
That is correct.
One of those disagreements was in July or August of 2017, right?
Yeah.
You saw Miss Bassett throw a vase that narrowly missed Dawn's head, right?
Yes, like I said, it was a small little elephant vase that she got from a gift shop somewhere.
She picked up that vase, right?
Yes, like I said, it was a small vase, but yes, she picked it up.
And she threw it, right?
Yeah, like I said, she was angry, but again, that's the worst I've ever seen it. After that, they resolved it.
But that's a yes, right?
Yes.
And I want to talk now about that timeline. It was about a month or two before Dawn disappeared, right?
Yes, it was.
I want to talk about why Dawn might have disappeared. You were interviewed on 64 Minutes, isn't that right?
Yeah, it was.
In that interview, you were shown a document called a petition for injunctive relief, right?
Yeah.
Could you pull up Exhibit 34 in your electronic notebook, ma'am?
Yes. One moment.
Let me know when you get to it. Mr. Ragnoni, if you could take that down for just a second, thank you.
All right, I have it up.
Ma'am, you recognize that document to be a restraining order that Don filed against his wife. Isn't that true?
Yeah, there's some language in here I don't completely understand, but that's what it says.
And ma'am, you recognize the handwriting in that document to be that of Dawn Clark. Isn't that right?
Yeah, the writing in blue does look like Dawn's.
Your Honor, at this time, we move to admit Exhibit 34 in part. Specifically, we'd only like to admit the last sentence by Don Clark and his signature at the bottom. Could we make an offer of proof outside of the earshot of the jury constructively as to what that statement is?
Sure.
The statement is, "I'm afraid she's going to kill me in my sleep." We'd just like to admit that statement and his signature, and we have a redacted copy prepared.
Ms. Desai?
Your Honor, we'd object to more prejudicial than probative.
Can you elaborate?
Yes, of course. Your Honor, the petition that opposing counsel is referring to was denied. And furthermore, Your Honor, Don Clark never refiled after the petition was denied. In Exhibit 4, which is already on the record, Mandy Tuminelli states that he didn't refile because things were getting better with his wife. Therefore, Your Honor, the statements that opposing counsel are showing, we have good faith reason to believe that that's not how Don Clark felt on the actual day in question. Therefore, it would prejudice the jury as to thinking that that is how the relationship was between Don and the defendant on the night in question.
Response, Your Honor?
Yes.
We would assert that counsel's objection goes to weight and not admissibility. There's certainly a probative value in the jury hearing this document. It's statements from the decedent, Mr. Clark, about the person that is being charged with murder today. It's him saying that he was afraid she was going to kill him in his sleep. Certainly, there's not such a prejudicial value that is so substantial that it outweighs that probative value this document gives the jury.
If I may, Your Honor?
Yes, I'm going to give you the last word.
The prejudicial value does outweigh the probative value, considering that we have statements from Don Clark that that's not how he felt on the night in question. Your Honor, the jury would see this document. It would inflame their passions because they would be led to believe that that is how the relationship between Don and the defendant was on August 18th.
I'm going to go ahead and allow it in the redacted form. But Ms. Desai, you are free to argue on closing argument that this is not reflective of how the decedent actually felt.
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Ragnoni, could we get that redacted copy on the screen, please? Ma'am, you recognize that to be Don's handwriting, don't you?
I'm sorry, do you want me to look at my own copy or the redacted copy?
Whichever you'd like, ma'am, as long as you're focusing on that handwriting from Mr. Clark.
Yeah, like I said, the writing in blue does look like Dawn's.
In that document, that writing says, "I'm afraid she's going to kill me in my sleep." Isn't that right?
That is what it says. But I honestly don't think that's what happened. I mean, like I said, I've been with Kara and Dawn for almost 2 years, and the worst it ever got was when Kara threw a small, tiny
Objection,
trinket.
response, Your Honor. We'd move to strike the last portion of the witness's statement about her feelings about their relationship. Your Honor, they'll have a chance to talk about that on redirect examination. Our question is asked was simply what was said in that document.
I agree. Sustained. It'll be stricken.
So, ma'am, that's a yes. He said, "I'm afraid she's going to kill me in my sleep." Isn't that right?
That's what it says on the document, yes.
Thank you, ma'am. No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Marx. Ms. Desai, any redirect?
Briefly, Your Honor, just one question.
Of course.
Ms. Young, the statements that Attorney Marx just had you read, did you ever see that happen in the time you were filming at the park?
No, I never saw anything like that happen.
Thank you, Ms. Young. Nothing further.
Recross, Your Honor.
May I ask one question? Is that, Mr. DeCamp, is that allowed in this jurisdiction?
Your understanding is as good as mine on that front. I think a brief one is perfectly fine.
Okay, then with
I
that,
believe it is permitted, Your Honor, unless there's an objection.
if
No
that's,
objection.
okay, okay, then we're all on the same page. Go ahead, Mr. Marks.
Ma'am, you weren't with Don and Kara every hour of every day, correct?
No, I was with them for 8 hours, 5 days of the week for 2 years.
You weren't with them during the night, right?
I was there from around 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. every day, so not the night, but the evening.
Thank you, Your Honor. Nothing further.
Okay, and with that, Ms. Young, thank you for your testimony. You are excused. Okay, with that, do you have another witness, Ms. Desai, or?
No, Your Honor, the defense rests.
Okay, wonderful. So as Mr. DeCamp just instructed, let's move over to speaker view. During closing argument, before we proceed, does anybody need a brief break? Mr. DeCamp, do we have time for a 2 to 5 minute recess?
It looks like all the other rounds have started closings already, so just to keep up with them, probably not.
Okay, sounds good. Then if both parties are ready, we'll just proceed into closing arguments.
We're ready to proceed, Your Honor.
Wonderful. Ms. Desai?
We're ready as well, Your Honor.
Okay. Mr. Marks? Are you ready?
Judge Leidy, Ms. Desai, members of the jury. It's not hard to dial a cell phone. Everyone who has one knows that you can take it out of your pocket, punch in a few buttons, and talk to about anyone you might like. But today you learned that that was something the defendant never even bothered to do. Why? Because she knew her husband wasn't going to answer. Because she knew exactly where he was. Right where she left him. That's why we as the government have charged the defendant with murder. And now, we couldn't just come in here and say it. We had to bring you proof. We had to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Miss Bassett killed her husband and that she did so intentionally. And now today, it's up to you to determine whether or not we've met our burden. And to reach that determination, all you have to do is follow what was forgotten. Follow what was forgotten from the car fentanyl to the car, from the car to the call, and from that call straight back to the defendant. Now, I know that throughout today's trial, there have been a lot of names, numbers, people, and places, and all of that can get a bit confusing. So I want to break down the evidence piece by piece, starting with that car fentanyl. You heard from Joe Young today that in the weeks leading up to Dawn's disappearance, Kara and Dawn fought frequently. In fact, you learned in one occasion, Miss Bassett got so angry that she threw a vase that narrowly missed Dawn's head. Not only that, Miss Young told you that Dawn and Kara would fight about money, and that whenever those fights occurred, she was instructed to delete that footage. We also showed you this power of attorney document that's on the screen that showed that in the event that Mr. Clark disappeared, not just died, disappeared, that Miss Bassett would get control of everything. His money, his assets, his properties, his investments, and that park. So on August 18th, 2017, when everyone had left that park, you learned that Miss Bassett snuck into that supply, stole that car fentanyl, crept up on her husband, and stabbed him. But she forgot to cover up that car fentanyl. She forgot to cover up that log. She forgot to cover up her guilt. But that's not the only thing the defendant forgot. You heard that she also forgot that her car had a GPS system that showed her car driving from her house to the Big Gum Swamp, 100 miles away. Agent Branham took the stand and told you that there was algae found on Miss Bassett's boots and on the wheelchair and in her own car that matched back to that swamp. And I want to be clear, they didn't just find the same kind of algae. They found the same mixture in the same composition that was chemically identical to the algae found at that swamp. It wasn't just similar algae, ladies and gentlemen, it was identical. So finally, we're going to ask you to follow what was forgotten back to that elephant park. And now, today the defense tried to tell you that Miss Bassett was just a worried spouse whose husband disappeared in the middle of the night. But to an innocent person, when someone they love just disappears without a trace, well, then they try to call that person, or they try to text that person, or they try to look for that person, or they call the police, or they call their friends. But ladies and gentlemen, Miss Bassett didn't do any of that. Because someone she loved didn't disappear. She knew exactly where he was. Now today, the defense tried to tell you a different story. They told you about the Costa Rican mafia, told you that Don left without a trace and just went down to Costa Rica. And now it's true. The defense doesn't have a verdict today. But since they told you that story, you're still allowed to ask whether it makes sense, to ask whether it's reasonable. And so I want you to think about the absurdity of what they're asking you to believe. They're asking you to believe that Don Clark, a multimillionaire, left everything he owned, all his money, his kids, his wife, and just moved to Costa Rica. And how did they claim Mr. Clark did that? Well, when he got in his car, drove 100 miles to a swamp he'd never been to before, drove 100 miles back to a private airport, ditched his car, and didn't take his private jet. Members of the jury, that's not reasonable doubt. It's doubting reason. If you really want to know what happened to Don Clark, all you have to do is follow what was forgotten. From the carfentanil to the car. From the car to the call, and from that call, straight back to the defendant. Now, I know that what I'm asking you to do today, it isn't easy. It might be easy to look at Miss Bassett and say, she's just a fun-loving animal person. She couldn't do something like this. It might be easy to look at Don and Kara and say that a marriage could never descend to the point of a murder. But we don't come into this courtroom to do what's easy. We come into this courtroom to do what's right. Follow what was forgotten. You'll find the defendant. And when you do, we'll ask that you find her guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marx. Closing argument from the defense.
Yes, Your Honor.
Desai, proceed when you're ready.
His face went white. Then he went dark. May it please the court, opposing counsel, members of the jury. Today, the government had to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Kara Bassett killed Don Clark. They had to show you there was no other, even plausible explanation for Mr. Clark's disappearance. But they couldn't meet that burden. Because you see, Attorney Marx asked you to follow what was forgotten. So we're going to ask you to follow what was ignored. They couldn't meet their burden because they ignored the missing links, the missing alibis, and the missing column. First, they ignored the missing links. They tried to show you a petition for injunction that Don Clark filed, but you see, what they didn't tell you is that he never refiled that petition because he didn't feel that way about Kara Bassett on the night in question. He told his attorney that everything was fine in their relationship. The government tried to tell you that Kara Bassett poisoned Don Clark with carfentanil, but they have no eyewitnesses, no video footage, no forensic evidence to support this theory. They don't even know when that syringe of carfentanil was taken, let alone who took it, ladies and gentlemen. Government also tried to tell you that there was algae found on Big Gum Swamp on the defendant's boots. But ladies and gentlemen, when I asked Agent Branham what the Redfield ratio of Elephant Park is, he didn't know. He didn't know because the FBI never tested the 5 square mile park that Kara lived and worked on. The park that has a swamp in the middle of it, ladies and gentlemen. Government threw out a lot of accusations today, but each and every piece of evidence they tried to present you, they couldn't link it back to Kara. Second, they ignored missing alibis. And ladies and gentlemen, I want to take you back to my cross of Agent Steph Branham. I asked the Agent Branham how many people had access to the shed of carfentanil at Elephant Park. He said 4. I then asked eyewitness Joe Young the same question. And I want you to keep in mind, for the past 5 years, Joe Young has spent 8 hours a day, 5 days a week at Elephant Park. And she told us that 12 people had access to that shed of carfentanil, not 4 members of the jury, but 12. The FBI was off by 8. 8 people they didn't even know existed who had access to the weapon they think killed Don Clark. Ladies and gentlemen, 2 of those 8 people don't have alibis for the night in question. Nate Garson. We don't know where Nate Garson was on August 18th, 2017. We don't know where Saba Grandi was on August 18th, 2017. Ladies and gentlemen, those weren't the only missing alibis. You heard about that Costa Rican caller today. We don't know where that caller was on the night of August 18th, 2017. How can the government meet their burden today when there are 3 suspects out there without alibis, ladies and gentlemen? And third, a missing caller. You learned about Don Clark's business interests with the Costa Rican mafia. You learned about how he would go to Costa Rica alone and wouldn't tell anybody about what he did on these trips. And we showed you his phone records. You saw that on the night in question, someone from Costa Rica texted and called Don Clark. It's been 3 years since that phone call, and the government can't tell you who called him, can't tell you what they told him, can't tell you why he disappeared just a few hours later. Let that sink in. On the night in question, someone spoke to Don Clark for 52 minutes while Don Clark's face was white as snow. And we don't know who that someone is. See, ladies and gentlemen, government had to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that Kara Bassett killed Don Clark, but all they could give you was a story with no evidence. But we're going to give him a chance. Attorney Marx is going to come before you with a rebuttal. And we're asking them during this rebuttal to show you any explicit evidence that Kara Bassett ever touched that missing syringe of carfentanil. Any evidence that they know where Nate Garson, Saba Grandi, and that Costa Rican caller were on August 18th, 2017. Ladies and gentlemen, any evidence that they can be certain Don Clark is even dead. And when they fail to do this, when they continue to rest their entire case on implications and inferences, I want you to remember this, ladies and gentlemen. We don't know who took out that missing syringe of carfentanil. We don't know when it was taken. We don't know where Nate Garson, Saba Grandi, and the Costa Rican caller were on the night in question. And ladies and gentlemen, we don't know if Don Clark is really dead. But what we do know, for a certain fact, ladies and gentlemen, is that on August 18th, 2017, when a Costa Rican caller texted and called Don Clark's face went white. Then he went dark. Find Kara Bassett not guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Desai. Mr. Marx, rebuttal?
Yes, Your Honor.
Whenever you're ready.
Judge Leidy, Ms. Desai, Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Ms. Desai just told you a flashy story about someone from Costa Rica, about a missing link, missing alibi, missing caller, and we'll talk about what was missing in a moment. But she challenged us to answer a list of questions, told us that we don't know all these different things, but members of the jury, don't let the defense hide behind questions that have already been answered. We know who was driving that car. We know that the algae on Miss Bassett's boots was an identical match to the algae from the swamp. We know that Miss Bassett was one of the people who had access to that carfentanil, and we know that Don Clark was afraid of her. I'm afraid she's gonna kill me in my sleep. Ladies and gentlemen, evidence like that doesn't just pile up against an innocent person. Now, it's true that there was a caller in Costa Rica that the government couldn't identify. But there's no evidence whatsoever supporting the fact that that caller had ever talked to Don Clark in the past, that there was any evidence that he had access to that carfentanil, any evidence he was driving that car. They want to tell you that Don just up and left without taking anything. It doesn't make any sense, ladies and gentlemen. Follow what was forgotten. You'll find the defendant. But when you do, we'll ask that you find your line. Guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marx. At this time, scoring attorneys, I ask that you complete your ballots and submit them. And then we'll proceed with comments after. So take a few moments to do that.
I'm stopping the recording now, and once we get the all clear when the ballots are all turned in, we can start comments. Thank you all.